Hello everyone, and now we are going to move on to potassium and what it does for the plants. And we're going to touch on three different areas that potassium helps with our plants. And first of all, it helps with the uptake and management of water. And how it does that, it helps promote root growth, which we all know more roots, the more water the plant can take up. And it helps with the opening and closing of the stomatas in the leaves, which does two things. One, it helps aid in the absorption of CO2 for the plant, which it needs. And also, it helps with siphoning water from the roots through the leaves when it opens up the stomatas. So it siphons up water throughout the whole plant, which helps with nutrient uptake and distributing the nutrients throughout the plants. And it also helps with the rigidity of the plant and the warding off of the pests and diseases by helping with cell turgidity. Probably butcher that word, but essentially what that means, it creates a high water pressure in the cell walls. So with all of this, with the increased roots, with the water being able to come up through the plants and be able to control the stomatas and opening and closing, it also will help then with its drought resistance. When it gets too hot out and water is in high demand, this will help with closing those stomatas and retaining the water. So now we move on to the second thing that potassium helps with our plants. And that is with the synthesizing of the proteins and starches. And particularly with the starches, it needs the potassium in the system before the plant will even start producing the starches. And also, it helps activate the many growth-related enzymes in the plants. So basically, it helps with the aiding in, like I said, proteins, starches, and many of the enzymes in the plant, which obviously helps with all the way down from its roots, its leaves, and what we want is to our pumpkins. Which brings me to the third and final thing that potassium does for our plants, which, like I said, with the helping of the transportation of water, it also transports starches or sugars throughout the plant, which then moves into our pumpkins. And what this will help do, it will help enhance the fruits, the size of the fruit, its color, and the overall wall thickness. So now, I know I did most likely simplify all of this, but these are the key roles that potassium does for our plants. It helps with water management. It helps with producing proteins and starches and enzymes. And it helps with the overall health of our pumpkins. So now we are going to move on to what happens when we don't have enough potassium in our plants, and what happens when we have too much potassium. So the first thing you'll notice, and it's one of the first symptoms that pops up with potassium deficiency, is you'll notice around your leaves they'll get a little crispy. They'll be brown around the edges. And this will first appear once again in the older leaves. And then you'll start noticing it progressively move up into the newer growth of the plant. And you'll also notice kind of a slowing down, stunted growth, because potassium plays an important role in the growth, essentially, of the growth of the plants. So, low in potassium, your plant starts to slow down. And you'll notice that it will wilt more often, just because the cell wall water pressure in the plant is low. It's just, or non-existent, so the cells are unable to support the plant. And then you'll start, if this potassium deficiency continues to go on, the leaves will start falling off. You'll start losing the leaves sooner than you normally will, which you may see this more so all during the end of the season, or more so I should say mid-season. And it might be part of why the center of your plant is starting to die off. One of the reasons. There's multiple reasons, but this is one of the reasons why mid-season on, the center of your plant starts to die off, is the potassium deficiency, because your pumpkin is sucking up so much of it and your plant's not getting it. So that's one of the things you may see. And also an increase in pest and disease issues, because your plant will be in distress, so it'll make your plant more attractive for pest and disease to come and feast on it. And your roots, it'll affect your roots. They'll be weak and they'll be unhealthy, and they'll age more, so they won't be as efficient, so they won't pick up as much water and nutrients for the plant. So those are a lot of bad things that potassium does if you just don't have enough in it. And don't have that scare you into thinking we need to add more potassium for our plants. Because where it's true, you can't really harm the plant itself if you add too much potassium. But what you do with hurting the plants when you add too much potassium is that it will start to lock up other nutrients, such as it will lock up your nitrogen, your magnesium, manganese, iron, and zinc, which then, when it's locking these nutrients, it will give you a false assumption that there's a deficiency of those nutrients, which there will be, like I said before, there'll be plenty of those nutrients in the ground, but because we bumped up the potassium level in our plants, we lock those up. So then we start getting deficiencies in those nutrients. So it really doesn't affect the plant itself, but it will, like I said, lock up other key nutrients. So, in a nutshell, this is what potassium does and what the deficiencies are, which are significant, and what it does if we add too much. So now that we're done with potassium, and for next week we are going to move on to the, I guess you can say, the second tier of the macronutrients, which will be which we're going to start. Let me start that over. Which we're going to start with calcium. So until next time, guys, I will see you later. Bye-bye.